welcome everybody. My name is Barry Merrick. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy and the chapter chair of YPO Metro New York. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you to Arindam Bhattacharya and Jim Hemerling. Arindam and Jim, welcome. How are you today?
Oh, very well, very well. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for including us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you both so much for being here. We're going to have a great kickoff to the week together. I know Jim is joining from the Bay Area, Arindam from New Delhi. I'm here in New York, so just getting started with the week. And we have a really important topic that we're going to be discussing today. And I truly believe if we engage with this in the right way, it can be quite transformative for our organizations and our leadership. Our focus is going to be on 9 key strategies for navigating critical technological, economic, and social change. And obviously, our world is brimming full of these changes at the moment. And it's such a timely conversation. I'm glad that we get to have Arindam and Jim leading us in this conversation. Just to give you a little bit of context on their backgrounds, Arindam and Jim are senior partners and managing directors at Boston Consulting Group, BCG. They're the co-authors of a book called Beyond Great, which also has the same title as our event today, 9 Strategies for Thriving in an Era of Social Tension, Economic Nationalism, and Technological Revolution. Arindam previously led BCG across India, and he was a member of the global leadership team of BCG's industrial goods practice and led the industrial goods practice in India. He was also co-leader of BCG's Global Advantage Initiative and co-founder and director of the BCG Henderson Institute. Jim has co-authored numerous publications on transformation, organizational effectiveness, as well as culture, including transformation, delivering and sustaining breakthrough performance, and globality, competing with everyone from everywhere for everything. His work has been featured in all kinds of leading publications, including Forbes, Economist, CNBC, and so forth. So they're going to be the ideal guys for both of us. And to kick us off, Jim and Arindam, I want to ask you first and foremost by asking you, of the thousands of books that are out there around globalization, transformations, and so on, what did you find was the gap in the market for your particular vision that you crystallized in this book? What's at stake here, and why do you believe it's so important for business leaders to engage with it?
So let me kick this off, Barry. And I would like to go back to something that you mentioned, which really in a way was the source of this book. I've been researching this whole topic around globalization and competitiveness for many years. And Jim and I collaborated and wrote the earlier book, Globality, which was really about the rise of the emerging markets, which was at that time the defining, in some sense, meta trend that all companies, local or global companies, were trying to understand and grapple with. And as I started looking at this over the last few years, one of the questions that I had in all the interviews that I did with business leaders was, do you have a good sense of what it would take to build advantage in say 20, I used to throw a date 2030, advantage 2030, and what kind of organization would you have in 2030? Would it be the same one which you had 25 years ago, or would it be very different? And the answers were invariably, we know that the organization is going to be very different, but we still don't know the playbook. We still don't know. We are traveling, we are piloting, we are grappling with piloting different things, we are grappling with it, but really there was a missing kind of playbook which had been put together. And that was really the genesis. We said, look, here is a book waiting to be written around the new playbook in the new world that we are facing today.
Excellent, Arindam. Really excited to dive in. Just so you could, if either one of you could share with us, let's say somebody got this book, really engaged with it, and like decided, okay, you know what, this is my new Bible for business. I'm going to just make all of this happen. If a whole range of organizations decided to do this, what would be the ultimate outcome? How would you picture that, the average organization in 2030 that goes with this playbook that you're developing, the key ingredients you're developing here. My hope in asking you this question is to help all of us kind of visualize a North Star of, well, what kind of organization do these two gentlemen think is most ideally suited to succeed in the kind of world we live in now and the one we're going to be living in very soon?
Yeah,
so again,
yeah, go ahead, Arindam.
No, I was just saying that let me go forward, and Jim, you should add to it. It was very interesting. One of the endorsers of this book, the global CEO, executive chairman of Lafarge Holcim, which is the largest cement company in the world, in his endorsement wrote that we have to question the fundamental beliefs that we had formed about the world and what it takes to win in this world. And to me, that's really, if I would kind of step back, what will change? I think the fundamental DNA of an organization that we have developed over the last, say, 25, 30 years of operating in a world which was moving in one direction, that fundamental DNA will have to undergo a change. DNA will have to undergo a change in terms of how do you define and meet the expectations of all your stakeholders, and stakeholders not just shareholders. Who are your customers and how you engage with them, what kind of value propositions you take to them, even to the fact of what are you providing. I mean, are people today not really looking at careers? They are also looking at what is the extent of the experience and contribution. So it's a very different DNA that you will have to build. And that to me is really something that breaks the fundamental beliefs as the group CEO of Lafarge endorsed. Jim, like to add?
Yeah, I would just say, look, Barry, in some ways, you could say that it's the title of the book that actually defines what we think. Beyond great. Beyond is a message basically saying what has made you great, you've got to go beyond that. The world has been disrupted by these three major forces of social tension, economic nationalism, and technological revolution. And as a result of that, the strategies you've been relying on for the past few decades are not going to take you forward. You need to go beyond. But beyond what? Well, also what defined great performance, what defined outstanding performance, it was great for shareholders only. And what we're saying is you need to go beyond great for shareholders only to being great for your customers, for your employees, for your suppliers, but of course, very importantly, for society more broadly. So that's how I would say it's about going beyond and going beyond what was great.
Excellent. And just so like in a nutshell here, if companies did adapt to this and evolve their DNA accordingly, would you just imagine then each company being extremely clear on how not only how are we delivering the earnings per share per quarter to our shareholders, but specifically what are the kind of returns to society, to our customers, to our employees? Is that kind of how you're envisioning it? Just a bigger clarity on like defining winning more broadly in the context of everyone you're delivering for.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say and it's the very first of the 9 strategies. We call it do good, grow beyond. And in that, we talk about companies that have not just thought about, doing good as something that's off to the side, maybe managed by a foundation the company may have, or by some of the donations that they made off to the side. But what we're saying is that the company is actually incorporating doing good at the core of their business. They're thinking about the impact on society from an environmental perspective, from an income inequality perspective, from a health outcomes perspective. They're looking at how do they incorporate that into the core DNA of their business. And I think, looking forward, we would hope that more companies would embrace that, and you'd see a fundamental transformation in the purpose, the fundamental purpose of the company in that direction.
I'd like to add one more kind of layer to this is the examples that we've used and what we found, the way some of these leading edge companies are thinking about it, they are not thinking that doing good is just is good by itself. They are saying, how do we not just kind of embed it into the core of our business, but how do you create advantage in the market? It it could be advantage with your employees. It could be advantage with capital, those who are deploying capital, and more, for example, uh, private equity funds. And private equity funds have actually crossed public money in terms of capital deployed in the US. More of them are looking at what are your performance on ESG. So, and markets are beginning to do that. It is also about how do you open up new markets, as we describe in the book, new through new products and services which you are not actually targeting customers earlier with. So it's not just kind of doing good into a business because it's what everyone expects, but really the leading edge companies actually have been able to convert that into advantage. And I think that to me was one of the ahas, that this is not about just feeling good. This is actually as critical a strategy as any other strategy to build advantage. And different companies will have different nuances on it, different focus on it, but really that's the way we would encourage everyone to think about it, that you can create advantage with some or more stakeholders by doing good.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. So before we dive fully into the framework you've created for us to consider these 9 strategies, just in a small nutshell, it's kind of self-explanatory in some ways, right? What this key trends are as far as like the social tension, economic nationalism, and tech revolution. Just tell us though, like very specifically, why you think these trends are making it like almost a prerequisite that companies need to employ these core strategies. For a lot of companies out there who, despite COVID, despite tech changes, let's say they're the ones that are thriving these days, why does everybody need to take this very seriously as far as the specific trends that you've chosen to focus on?
So again, let me do this first. If you look at any company, the way they have been thinking about the business in the second half of 20th century were really around 2 dimensions. One dimension was the shifts in technology, how it happened post World War II, where the mass manufacturing first, then the whole containers, then internet, and so on. So each technology actually fundamentally started changing the economics of business and the way businesses are run, and led to global supply chains emerging and so on and so forth. That's one. The other dimension is really around the rules of the game, and the rules of the game meaning how trade happens, how taxes are happening across borders and within borders. And this was based on the growing multilateralism and the multilateral framework that was put in place with the underlying agreements which was signed at Bretton Woods, Washington Consensus. Now, if you look at what's happened over the last 2 decades, and really the breakpoint in some sense seen as the global economic or financial crisis in 2008, there was a technology breakpoint, the growth of digital, but then this whole multilateralism driving the rules, that has gone a huge underlying change. And the third thing, which was never really in some sense within the ambit of leaders, which is climate, which is social inequity, which is growing what I call tribalism. This is becoming forces that determine market growth. This is forces that determine your success with shareholders or employees. So this is becoming center and square in the scope of business leaders. So to our mind, this new force of social tension, which was never really part of, in some sense, the thinking of business leaders because they had the governments taking care of it. Multilateralism weakening, and with uncertainty around economic nationalism, again, fundamentally changing the economic rules of the game, and the radical shift in technology coming together, meant that not just that the rules are different, the game that you play in many ways has changed. And that's really how we thought about, so how do you then play this game? And that's the playbook.
Yeah, and Barry, what I would say is, just to add to that, when we set out to write the book, we wanted a book that was both timely and timeless. And so when we looked at the major trends that are disrupting the world, we looked at it through that lens. What is it that companies are dealing with today, but also what will they be dealing with in the years and decades to come? And that's really, the lens through which we chose those three disruptive forces. You also just briefly mentioned COVID-19. This is not a COVID-19 book per se, and there are many books coming out on how to deal with and how to come out of the crisis. However, what I would say is that our view is that these same forces of social tension, economic nationalism, and technological revolution, they have essentially been pulled forward by anywhere between 5 to 10 years because of COVID-19. And so we're clearly seeing all around us increased concern around things like differential health outcomes and the rising income inequality, or thinking about the reality of having the need to have stable supply chains and also to protect employment in these times. And then also, technology has clearly dramatically accelerated online shopping and work from home. And so I would say that even though it's not a COVID book per se, we anticipated the trends that have just been pulled forward by COVID-19.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. I'm really excited to dive in now to this framework, this playbook that you've created. So share with us, first of all, so you split the book into these three major parts around growing beyond, operating beyond, and organizing beyond. Please kind of define for us like what those three angles are getting at overall, like why you chose to divide it as such. And then I'd like to spend 5 minutes on each of the three major parts with a focus on critical best practices we could immediately start implementing in our organizations or organizations that we have influence over. So if you'd like to kick off maybe by sharing with us the definitions behind those three parts of the book, and then we'll dive into them in turn.
If you add the global operating model, and one of the questions that I started off, I said that when you speak to business leaders and ask them, so do you know the playbook? The thing that, as I said, there are two parts of the answers. No, the playbook has to be developed, but at the same time, they also mentioned that the playbook has to kind of engage with every part of their agenda. It is not just agenda around supply chain. It is every part of the agenda, because they are facing questions: how do you grow? And how do you grow because of such a differential growth rate in different countries, and some dramatic shifts in the way customers engage with you? So how do you grow? At the same time, we know that supply chains are dramatically, they are changing. They want, one, it is not just efficiency and cost efficiencies, but you need to make them adaptable, resilient. But at the same time, new ways of how you deliver or design your value propositions, both in terms of how you partner with other companies using digital platforms or how do you use data. That's fundamentally forming the way you design and deliver your products and services. And finally, your organization. And we realize that the playbook has to deal with all three parts. And underlying, a core thing underlying that is leadership. How do you lead such a new, what we call beyond great organization? And that's how the book evolved. The interesting thing is sometimes when you start writing a book, you have a very, very clear view that this is the answer, this is the point that you want to make. But this book evolved over 3 years of research as we spoke to more and more business leaders, and we distilled out these strategies. So it's not that we had a very clear view, this is a strategy. We distilled out the strategies to construct this new playbook, which addresses every part of your global operating model.
Excellent. Thank you, Arindam. So to kick us off, Jim, you'd already started going into the first part, which is growing beyond. the first step you said is just making doing good as a central part of your operation, as opposed to a foundation that operates separately, for example. Share with us, what are the 3 key strategies beneath like this umbrella of growing beyond, and what are the specific steps we can take to integrate these in our businesses ASAP?
Yeah, so the first idea is that growth is incredibly important. Growth helps companies to deliver for their shareholders, but also it creates opportunities for their customers, for their employees, for the suppliers they partner with. It also demonstrates that they're able to deliver something of value to society more broadly. So the first strategy, and then I'll kick it back to Arindam, the first strategy we call do good, grow beyond. And many firms have long understood the importance of making a positive impact on society. We're not saying that we're the first to come up with that. However, most of these have viewed it as something that is separate from but not integrated into their core operations. So what we're saying is companies need to reimagine their core operations to deliver societal impact and hence long-term sustained growth, and that emphasis on sustained growth. And so one of the things that Arindam alluded to is that this really is a book about the stories of companies that are already leaning in. They're on the journey of going beyond. And so one of the example companies in this case is a company called Natura. Natura is a Brazilian cosmetics company, and since its founding in 1969, Natura has embraced a business model focused on ensuring sustainability, enhanced biodiversity, sourcing all the ingredients in sustainable ways, and really making this central, making sure that every one of the leaders is actually compensated, not just for shareholder returns, but also the impact on society more broadly. And so they're just a great one of many examples of companies that we talk about in the book, and in their case, specifically on this theme of do good, grow beyond. Arindam, maybe you just want to touch on a couple of the other growth strategies.
Before we move on, Arindam,
Yeah.
just really quickly, what would be really helpful as we're going through these is just one very specific action item, Jim, if you could share with us or challenge us to think about, like, how do we as a company, no matter where we are on the spectrum of like integrating, doing good, like how can we take it to the next step? What have you seen work really well? What's a good best practice?
Well, in this case, I commend Natura that, as I said, one thing that they do is they have aligned the leadership incentives to be on this holistic scorecard, not just shareholder value, but the impact on society more broadly. They also publish annually an environmental profit and loss statement alongside the typical financial statement. And so what they've done is they've put their commitments right out there, very publicly, holding themselves accountable. They also are a B Corp, and so they hold themselves to a much higher standard of what it means to be doing good and growing beyond. So I would say, the first thing I would say is, if you're really serious about this, then make your commitment public and make sure your leaders are aligned and held accountable.
And I'll just add one thing. I mean, Natura is a great example of how do you turn this strategy into an advantage for you by embedding it in your products, not just in products, but in your brand. And if you really look at the market cap valuation, they're one of the very first companies, global companies, to have actually become carbon neutral in 2007. And since then, they have been carbon neutral. They have a carbon, every senior leader in Natura has a carbon calculator for every major, so that they are aligned, and a significant part of the bonus is actually linked to that, as Jim alluded. But I found it exciting that, and that's one of the things that I would urge anyone to think about. TSI is not just about thinking that I will do good. It is also a way to start thinking about creating new advantage with new set of customers, engaging and attracting new talent, engaging with the governments and community, which gives you, in some sense, as someone quoted to us, a license to operate in those communities, and so on. So, and how do you change the mindset to be able to do that? And that, to me, was a very, very important lesson that every company which aspires to do this should aspire for.
Excellent. So just my key takeaway here, because it's so important So first of all, Arindam, I like that you always bring back this lens of do all these things with also the lens of creating advantage. So it's not just like really nice, really important, and people will feel better and you will make your better business, but also exploit that advantage by fully incorporating it into your brand and in your products, just so that everyone is aware. So it's like a living initiative that's actually helping you achieve your differentiation and unique value prop. Let's move to the two other growing beyond strategies. So stream it, don't ship it, and refine your global game. If you could, either one of you could give us a summary of like what these are about and what the best practices are we should keep in mind.
Let me go with the second one. All about in this new world, what's a value proposition today? I mean, we were very clear that we had to design a product or a service and sell it. Really, in sense, with the customers getting digitally engaged with you, and you as a company getting the ability to engage with the customers not as a one-time transaction, but really through the entire experience of using that product or service. The way you need to think and deliver your product and service is very different. So it's all about, it's not just designing a differentiated product or service. It is about creating a differentiated experience. It is about creating a solution to your customers. And how do you do that? You do that by fundamentally integrating digital and data with your physical product or service, and which really in a way has two major implications for every company. How do you conceptualize the experience or a solution has to be very different. It cannot be your R&D organization working wherever in the corner of your organization do that. You have to start putting a way of taking away with the customer in very, very different way. In fact, co-creating a lot of these solutions with the customers and external partners. That is a very fundamental change in the way you design and deliver. And it's also linked to sometimes the way you price these solutions very differently based on performance rather than based on that one simple price that you ask. So that's the second thing. And we are saying that these solutions are actually the fastest growing value pools or revenue in majority of the industries. You look at automotive and look at where the really the growth is coming from in terms of profits, it is in the mobility services. You look at healthcare, again, it is in these services. You look at financial services, again, in some of these new services where the fastest growth is coming from. So really, those companies which are actually at the forefront of being able to target these new solutions, they are actually growing much faster and they are being able to engage with a completely different way with their customers. So if you want to maintain it today in this market, in the way the industries are shifting, you need to play new value propositions.
Excellent. So in summary, would you say a best practice here is, regardless of what our product or service is, how do we better leverage digital and data and pricing around how we deliver, like unique innovative models on delivery, leveraging digital and data?
That is one, but again, it is not a push. You have to start putting the customer in the center of this process, what we call a customer journey. And that's what we describe in the book. How do you have a customer journey? It is not about just doing a survey and then getting some response and then going out and designing. You actually, some of the companies, you talk about Siemens, we talk about some of these companies which are in the retail business or consumer business, they put the customers and they actually co-create a solution. I mean, the kind of cutting edge is where the customers can actually customize the solution. You know, for example, they can download, customize the software which will run, say, a car. I mean, Tesla allows you to do that in a very limited way. But more and more companies are allowing you to customize the solution that you have on your physical product. And that is the way you need to think and design your next generation of products and services. So it is not the physical product or physical that is becoming so important to win. It is really the customer experience that you are able to generate that will get you to actually win in the marketplace.
Excellent. So, okay, leveraging digital and data and unique delivery mechanisms with customer at the absolute heart of the journey. How do we better deliver for them and give them that ability to customize by leveraging technology? Thank you very much for that. Next one is refining your global game. What do you guys mean by this, and how can a company, an organization take specific steps to refine their global game?
Yeah, so let me just take that. So if you think about the way companies thought about expansion globally in the past, they would think about, going into as many markets as possible, more was better, but also that they would go into those markets by using what we call an asset-heavy approach, which is that they would build their own manufacturing, their own distribution networks, and basically try to have full control over the entire supply chain. What we're seeing now is a fundamental change, first of all, which is be more selective in the markets that you choose to enter. You don't have to be everywhere. Some markets are inherently more profitable. They have better competitive dynamics. They have better growth characteristics. And so first of all, just be more selective in where you choose to operate. But then also think about how can you move away from the asset heavy to more asset light approaches, where you leverage other assets from other companies. A good example of this is Xiaomi. Xiaomi, the Chinese cell phone company, they had already established a significant position in China, but then we're looking to expand globally. Now, the traditional model would that they would build everything out on their own, but they didn't do that. I mean, a perfect example, when they went into India, what they did is they partnered with Flipkart, which was already a very established e-commerce distribution network. And so what they did is they were able to very rapidly, by leveraging a third-party e-commerce distribution, they were able to very quickly scale up and get full distribution across India. Also, as building on what Arindam was just saying about the product itself, they were thinking about how do we create a product, but then use digital features and services that we layer onto that to actually create a differential, product offering. And so that combination of a digital offering together with leveraging third-party assets enabled them to scale very rapidly, much faster than other companies that pursued this sort of asset-heavy approach in the past.
Excellent. A close friend is the CFO of Xiaomi, and yeah, it's an amazing case study of that expansion. So I appreciate that example. So in summary here, it's all about being picky with where you want to operate, but mostly also wherever you are operating, how do you become as asset light as possible through key partnerships and also leveraging technology to deliver more digitally versus physically.
Yeah,
excellent.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, let's switch gears to operating beyond. So share with us what the key 3 strategies are here. Because of our limited time, I'm happy for you to maybe just give us a comprehensive view of the 3 ways altogether in which you would recommend companies to operate. And then, we'll continue moving accordingly.
So let me very quickly give the 3 different strategies. And if you think about the traditional model of supply, which is operating model, how do you manufacture or how do you put together your product or service? You would have supply chain, traditional, you would have tiered suppliers, and then you will assemble, or you would create the service and then you would sell. Today, what we are saying is you need to think about your supply completely differently in 3 very distinct ways. First is, it's not only your supply chain, physical supply chain, it is also the ecosystem of partners who create the solution for the customer. So if you are selling a mobility service, it is not just your car, but it is a whole set of services that you may not be designing or developing app yourself, but you would partner with many others. And a car company might be partnering with over 100 such partners in a very different way than a traditional one-to-one supply chain. So that was one fundamental change, that you need to start thinking about the supply, not just supply chain, but also your ecosystem. And the last thing we are saying is a value proposition today, as we saw earlier, has data integrated into it, has digital technology integrated into it, software integrated into it. So you need to have not just a physical supply chain, but you need to also now start thinking about the digital supply chain. Where will you get the data? How will you process the data? How will you integrate it into your service or your product? And that has to come together. So the so if you put the customer right at the center, you need three things. You need the ecosystem, because there are many solutions which you will not provide, that the ecosystem will provide. You need to design your supply chain very differently to be flexible, not just only efficient. And you need to integrate data into that value proposition. So you need to create that digital supply chain. These three things is the equivalent of 21st century delivery model, which was equivalent to the 20th century physical supply chain. So that in a nutshell. And again, we have examples across industries of how companies are being able to do that. They are at early stages in all three transformation. But really, if you want to build a advantaged delivery, you need to work on all three.
Excellent. Well, that was an incredible way to summarize three relatively big strategies into like just 2 minutes, Arindam. So I appreciate that. In summary, what I'm taking away here is like every corporate leader could really focus in on, okay, how do we bolster the ecosystem around us? So all the organizations we work with to better deliver for the customer who's at the center of the journey. How can we make sure that we integrate all the data at all stages, whether it's, producing the product or service, delivering it, and then also delivering satisfaction through it. And then this third one, you mentioned you need this flexibility. Could you just share like 1 minute on like exactly what you mean by this, so that we can have a specific takeaway to reflect on as well?
COVID really had brought it kind of live when factories suddenly had to shut down. And before that, there were many other instances when you had Fukushima and factories suddenly had to shut down. Now, if you look at the last quarter of the 20th century, I mean, these supply chains and were actually designed, they were global supply chains. They were designed to be extremely efficient. They had no redundancy. So if your factory shut down, then the whole supply chain shut down. And suddenly you realize that this is not a one-off. This is happening more and more. So you need to design your entire delivery model to be not just efficient. You need to design your delivery model to be able to shift between one delivery, one plant or one center to another center, to be able to adapt very quickly to changes in tariffs. And example that we use is not the traditional, what we'll call a plant, but we actually use the Indian IT company, Tata Consulting Services, the way they deliver IT solution. They have over 200 such delivery centers around the world, and they can flexibly ship activities between the centers in a completely what I'll call flexible and resilient manner. So if a plant has if a center has to shut down, they can very quickly shift that capability to another center and still be able to deliver that solution to the customer in time and cost. So the ability to do that now, it is, yes, easy to do it when it's a solution, but more and more such flexibility are being embedded and built into your physical supply chain as well, not just these service supply chains.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
So for example, just an example, they did not lose a single man work in COVID. They were able to flexibly meet all the requirements by shifting work between their 200 odd service centers, which are integrated by a global, in some sense, network management.
Excellent. Right. So not just optimizing for how efficient, fast, and cheap can we produce something, but also how adaptable is it? If half the plants shut down, what would we do if this was no longer a possible provider? Who could be the other ones, and how adaptable are we? Excellent. Switching gears to the third and final part, organizing beyond. Would love to hear your key strategies when it comes to this. And if you could also incorporate the role of the quote unquote individual leader, right? So you have all this organizational strategies that an organization can implement. As part of that, in addition to the three strategies, would love to also hear from you specifically what kind of a leader is best suited to thrive in an organization like this, not just themselves, but also enabling others to thrive as well. After this answer, we're going to switch gears to our audience questions. So for everybody participating live, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box and we'll dive into them very shortly. So Jim, would you like to take a go at this one?
Sure, absolutely. So the third part of the book, as you said, is organizing beyond. And we've structured organizing beyond into three broad themes. One is primarily about the actual design of the organization. We call that get focused, fast, and flat. And what do we mean by those words? Focused is all about being focused on the customer. And traditionally, companies have designed organizations often that were driven by product or geography. And we're saying you've got to put the customer absolutely at the core. Fast is about agile ways of working. One of the most revolutionary changes that's happened to organization design over the past decade is the advent of small cross-functional co-located teams working on iterative sprints, getting real-time feedback from customers in the products that they're developing, with fully empowered teams to actually not just design, but also deliver what they're developing. So agile ways of working. And then also, very importantly now, with the advent of technology and data, is the ability to create horizontal platforms to help to create flat organizations, so few layers from top to bottom, but are joined together, knitted together by these horizontal data technology platforms. And so those are the core elements of design. All of this, by the way, needs to be underpinned by a culture that enables people to actually work in this new and different way. So that's the first element. The second one is then about talent. We call it thriving with talent. And thriving with talent really is about how do you actually attract talent into the company? How do you then inspire and empower those people? And then very importantly, how do you engage in constant upskilling? In this environment, the data is so clear that there's a massive gap in terms of the supply and demand, particularly for people that have digital skills, comfortable with technology, comfortable working in agile ways of working. So there's this huge supply-demand imbalance. And so companies are really having to reimagine how they attract, inspire, and also upskill their employees. That's the fundamental of thrive with talent. And then the third element in organizing beyond is around what we call embrace always-on transformation. In this environment of constant disruption, you need to pivot away from the way people have typically been thinking about transformation, which is more like a sprint. You set it up, you execute it, and then you go back to this wonderful state of business as usual. Well, that world is gone. You now need to embrace always-on transformation, which is more like a triathlon. You finish the swim, you jump on your bike, you start running, and then you keep going. And so in that environment, what we're finding is that companies really need to reimagine how they think about the approach to transformation. We introduce a framework we call the head, heart, and hands of transformation. The head is about envisioning the future and focusing on the big rocks, the priorities. The hands are all about how do you actually operate, execute while you're innovating using agile methods. But then it's the heart that really is the differentiator. And so when you look at a company like Microsoft under Satya Nadella's leadership, if you look back on the transformation they've been under over the past 6.5 years, what you can see is at the heart of their transformation is a focus on people. It's leveraging purpose. Everything is driven by that sense of purpose. In their case, to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. It's about creating a culture in which people can do their best work. It's about demonstrating empathy and caring for people whose lives are being disrupted. And it's also about making sure that your leaders are leading in a new and different way, that they need to lead into this new reality of beyond great leadership. So that's a very quick overview of a very big set of topics of organizing beyond.
That was excellent, Jim. And just as a cherry on top there, the very last thing you mentioned, having leaders that can best, essentially thrive themselves and enable others to thrive when they're following this framework. Share with us a few qualities of the requisite leadership skills needed to thrive in this kind of environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't I just say a few words, Arindam, then you pick it up. But I would say what we did is, as Arindam mentioned, we had the opportunity to interview over 100 leaders in the research for our book. And so from that, we've extracted what we call 6 beyond great leadership imperatives. One is to lead with a conviction to positively impact society. And that ties back to what we were saying about, do good, grow beyond. Another very important one is to forego command and control, which is what most leaders grew up with, and to embrace more of an approach to leadership around empowerment and coaching, where your goal is to enable a high degree of autonomy while still delivering alignment for those teams to be working together. Another one that's interesting is to model intellectual flexibility and dynamism and really embrace learning, or as Satya Nadella would say, to shift from being know-it-all to learn-it-all. This idea as well about embracing transformational leadership in an environment where the world is constantly changing. Every leader needs to be a transformational leader. And, in our case, we say that leaders need to lead with their heads, their hearts, and their hands. And so that's another very important element. Arindam, you might have a couple of other thoughts on what we learned from leaders.
No, I mean, Jim, as Jim pointed out, the way it came out very clearly is the old model of command and control, and I know the answers of leadership is gone. As the incoming CEO of Siemens told us, and we quote him in the book actually, where he says, look, I think one of the biggest change, his kind of company like Siemens with such a strong legacy of we know it all, we know all the engineering solutions. We have to change that culture and mindset and build a culture of learning. And I have to lead it myself personally. And I have to show and demonstrate to my reportees that I am in the journey of constantly learning. And that was for him one of the most critical changes in the leadership that he wants to embrace as he comes into a new kind of role. And another CEO put it very, very nicely when he said, look, we need to figure out a way that we can throw open the windows of boardroom and let fresh oxygen come in as ideas. And if we don't do that, if we just have all our discussion in the closed boardroom, we will just not know all the things that's happening around the world and be on top of things, because we are just, as humans, not equipped today to deal with the kind of complexities that companies face. So how do we do that? How do we make us a much more open organization to be able to create this opportunity of letting fresh oxygen of ideas come into a boardroom? So these are some of the things that we talk about, and I think these are absolutely critical today in today's era if we want to succeed as a leader.
Excellent. This was incredibly powerful and profound. So I appreciate all of the insights that you both shared. Gonna dive into the audience Q&A here. Let's do our best to do like 1 minute per question to the extent possible. First question is from Sophia Steffo, who asks and says, you talk about the need for companies to put their customers at the center. What are some practical tips you might have to help companies to begin to make that happen?
So let me answer that with an example. Siemens, I spoke about Siemens, and Siemens has built something called what they call MSCs, which are MindSphere applications. So MindSphere is their technology platform, application centers. So these are centers where they bring their customers, where they bring the sales guys, where they bring other external partners, where they bring their R&D engineers together and go through the experience of how the customer actually uses those products and they collectively actually determine which are the pain points, what are the areas their customers are feeling actually a pinch in the way they use the products or services, and then they jointly co-create solutions. So the way that you engage with your customers actually completely has changed for Siemens. And that's one of the things that when you want to put customers in the middle, you really need to rethink the way that you engage. And that's where it starts. Really rethink the way that you engage with the customers.
Excellent, Arindam. Thank you so much. Next question from Aditya Sangi, who asks, would you define Apple as beyond great? Any other companies who are beyond great in your opinion that we should take a note of and emulate?
So in the book, we have, and Jim mentioned earlier, I think he made mention a comment that this book is a playbook, but playbook not just about theory. This playbook is based on basically stories of companies who are pushing the boundaries. And we have some great companies who are doing pushing the boundaries. Now we talk about 9 strategies, but there are no companies which I would say are beyond great and all the 9 strategies. There are many companies which have started the journey on a few of them, and we talk to them and we kind of mention them as exemplars of companies who are doing, say, 4 or 5 of the strategies and progress. Apple is clearly one such company. Then we talk about Natura, we talk about John Deere, we talk about MasterCard, we talk about Tata Consulting Services, we talk about something that is very interesting, which Alibaba is doing. Of course, there's Microsoft on the whole issue of talent organization. Some of the things that have been done by Unilever are really, really at the cutting edge. So we have the stories of all these companies, and we will say that all these companies are exemplar of one or more strategies on the journey to beyond great. And Apple is clearly one of those companies.
Excellent. Thank you, Arindam. Next question. In the takeaways from your book, you mentioned that we need to shift to digital practices instead of physical in order to create a sustainable business. COVID has accelerated the shift towards digital offerings. What do you think we need to do to maintain that shift even after the pandemic has ended?
Yeah, well, just to answer that with a very specific question, one company that has really embraced becoming a truly digital company is Nike. And what Nike has done is, starting a few years ago when they made the decision that they needed to wrest control from Amazon of the control over their brand, their supply chain, and their connection to their consumers, what they've done is they've elevated the importance of that digital transformation. They've actually created a digital transformation office, and that office is responsible for curating a portfolio of transformation initiatives in an always-on transformation sense. They look each year to revisit what are the biggest priority digital initiatives. They make sure that they think about the resourcing of those, the funding of those. They also think about the interdependencies between those different initiatives. And so what they've done is they've embedded the idea of always-on transformation into their operating model. And I would say, as we look at companies that are really embracing digital, again, it can't just be something that's off to the side or left to the IT department. It has to be something that is embedded as a core part into the operating model at the most senior level of the company, right down through it. In many ways, the way Nike has done that.
So let me kind of add to this, if I may, for give me a minute. If we look at a chapter on digital and data, we talk about 4 strategies or sub-strategies, how companies should be approaching this. At the core is, of course, to provide a solution, the way Nike is engaging with the customers to provide a solution, not just selling a shoe, but selling or providing a running solution in some sense, which is customized to the requirements of both the surface on which you run as well as the specific style of the person, the way he runs. So you can do one of 4 things. One is you really need to look at how digital can be put into every part of your process to improve it. And that's really the traditional way that you look at technology. Then there are some 3 other ways. One is the way that you are able to build completely new solutions, as we spoke about. I mean, we spoke about Siemens, speak about John Deere, we speak about Whirlpool, the way they are conceptually rethinking their value propositions, integrating it. Then there's another way, which is the way we talk about a company like Schneider, which is how do you partner with a much bigger set of solution providers to design new solutions, which you can very quickly take it to all your customers around the world. And the last one is it allows you to address completely new profit pools, which you were not targeting earlier. So in many ways, when you think about digital transformation, a digital transformation can do each one of these four completely different things. And some of the leading edge companies actually are looking at more than 2 or 3 of these strategies simultaneously.
Excellent. Thank you, Arindam. Thank you, Jim. I do have to say that it's pretty rare to be so comprehensive, not just in this conversation we had, but your book truly is feels like a complete playbook, as in, yes, obviously we can't implement all strategies simultaneously all at once and get that, but having that mindset, making progress across all of these 9 areas is so critical, and having that becoming the kinds of leaders that Jim was pointing out, that we need to be. I think these are extremely practical, also prerequisite, non-negotiable things that all of us need to be thinking about as organizational leaders. So I want to say a huge thank you for crystallizing it all in a book that we can all leverage. And I do want to ask you, you've been incredibly generous sharing your insights today. How can our community best engage with each of you? How can we best support your endeavors? And if you have a final word of wisdom or a call to action, we'd love to hear one from each of you also, just to help us wrap up the conversation.
Jim, would you like to go first?
Yeah, look, I would say that some of the things that we've been talking about today, we really, as I said, we wrote a book that it would be both timely and timeless. And we hope that you've seen in this discussion that the strategies that we've developed, the implications for leaders, really can help you right now during the pandemic, but also well beyond that. And if I just take, what would be the final word I would have is during the pandemic, leaders have demonstrated greater than usual attention for their people. Companies mobilized to secure their safety and well-being and so on. What I would say is, as companies consider how to move forward, transforming beyond the crisis, is to make sure that they continue in that same vein of making sure that people are not treated as a means to an end, or worse, as collateral damage, but that we really put people at the center or at the heart of their actions and the way that they are transforming going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim. Arindam, any final call to action or word of wisdom from you, and also any best ways in which our community can best engage with you?
Two thoughts. As I said, this is, the whole premise of the book is beyond great. It is not a kind of one-point destination. You cross one mountain and you'll see another one. So it is a journey, and we were very particularly saying that this is a book of journey. I mean, this is a book which we would like you to use to start this journey. And how do you customize this journey depends on you, your starting point, your industry, but really, in some sense, you need to customize the journey. This is not, you have to do this. I mean, we are written the book in a way that it is much more around the contours of what you need to do in terms of journey. So encourage you very, in our view, the urgency to start this journey. And as you start the journey, I mean, you will learn more. And as you learn more and bring more confidence, get more confidence, you can start embracing more of these strategies. But you need to start this journey, and you can start this journey on any of the 9 different kind of routes that we have laid out.
Excellent. Well, I can't think of a better way to be galvanized to kick off this journey together. I'm personally very excited to dive in together at our all hands meeting later today, just to, see how we're going to go about this. Really appreciate both of you being here, and excited to spread the word, and hope to meet you both in person very soon.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Thank you both. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week and see you all again soon. Thank you, Jim, Arindam. See you again soon, guys.
Thank
I
you,
know.
Barry,
Bye.
and pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.